I'm Meredith Montgomery, 32 years old, and I never expected to be sitting in a leather chair across from our family lawyer, completely numb with grief and shock. My parents died in a car accident 3 weeks ago, and now Mr. Parker was handing me documents showing they had left everything: the house, investments, heirlooms to my brother Ethan. Everything. I stared at the papers, my vision blurring as I thought about working through nursing school while caring for my sick mother, always feeling second best to my golden child brother. Before I tell you how I went from disinherited daughter to reclaiming my life, please like and subscribe if you're watching from somewhere that also knows family heartbreak. Share in the comments where you're from. I found strength knowing I wasn't alone in this journey. The Montgomerys were once a prominent name in the Boston area. My grandfather built a successful manufacturing business that my father, Harold, expanded into a small empire of commercial real estate and investments. Our family home was a colonial-style mansion in Brookline with manicured gardens and a driveway large enough for 6 cars. It was in this house that the dynamics that would shape our family were established early on. From my earliest memories, Ethan was the golden child. 3 years my senior, he was charismatic, outgoing, and displayed a natural aptitude for business even as a child. When he was 8, he organized a neighborhood lawn care service, recruiting local kids and taking a cut of their earnings. My father beamed with pride, declaring, "That's my boy. A born Montgomery businessman." I was different, quieter, more introspective, and drawn to helping others. While Ethan received business books for Christmas, I asked for medical encyclopedias and volunteered at the local hospital in high school. My father viewed my interests with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "Montgomerys build wealth, Meredith, we don't serve others," he would say, his voice tinged with disdain. "That's the path to obscurity." My mother, Lillian, was gentler than my father. A former literature professor who gave up her career to support my father's ambitions, she always encouraged my empathy but never strongly enough to stand against my father's wishes. "Your father wants what's best for you," she would say softly after he criticized my volunteer work. "He just shows it differently than most." The divide in our family grew wider when I chose to attend nursing school instead of pursuing a business degree at Harvard like Ethan. My father couldn't comprehend my decision. "You could manage hospital systems, run healthcare investment funds," he argued during a particularly heated dinner. "Instead, you want to empty bedpans and take orders from doctors. It's beneath a Montgomery." "Helping people isn't beneath anyone," I responded, earning a rare look of quiet pride from my mother. That night, my mother came to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. "I admire your conviction, Meredith," she whispered, "but please try to understand your father. In his world, power and influence are how you make a difference." Meanwhile, Ethan followed perfectly in my father's footsteps. Harvard Business School, then rising quickly through a prestigious marketing firm to executive level by 30. His visits home were celebrations, with my father opening expensive wine and discussing investment strategies late into the night. Our family dynamic shifted dramatically when my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The progression was relatively quick, and within 2 years, she needed significant assistance. My father hired caregivers, but they had high turnover due to his exacting standards and my mother's deteriorating condition. 5 years ago, I made the decision to move back home. I transferred to a hospital closer to my parents' house and spent my off days caring for my mother. My tiny apartment was exchanged for my old bedroom, a step backward that felt necessary but painful. "You don't have to do this," my mother protested weakly when I arrived with my belongings. "Your father can hire more help." "I want to be here," I assured her, though the truth was more complicated. I wanted to be there for her, but returning to my childhood home meant subjecting myself to my father's constant disapproval again. During those 5 years, Ethan rarely visited. Business trips, social obligations, and his new condo in downtown Boston kept him busy. When he did appear, it was with expensive gifts: a state-of-the-art wheelchair for Mom, rare wines for Dad, but never with time. He would breeze in for dinner, make everyone laugh with stories of his glamorous life, then disappear again, leaving me to administer medications and help Mom to bed. My father never seemed to notice this disparity. "Ethan's building his future," he would say proudly. "That's what I raised him to do." As for me, my father's disappointment calcified into cold indifference. He spoke to me primarily about my mother's care, treating me more like an employee than a daughter. "You're wasting your potential here," he told me once after I mentioned a promotion opportunity at the hospital. "Assistant head nurse, you could have been running the entire healthcare network by now if you'd listened to me." What he never acknowledged was that I was the one who adjusted my mother's medications when her symptoms flared, who held her hand through painful procedures, who read to her when her vision became too blurred to read herself. I was there, present in ways that mattered to her, if not to him. 3 months before the accident, my father and I had our final argument. I had been offered a position on a research team studying innovative mistreatments, an opportunity that would advance my career and potentially help patients like my mother. "I need to reduce mice here," I explained over dinner. "The hospital is willing to work with my schedule, but I'll need to hire additional help for Mom." My father's face darkened. "So now you're abandoning your mother too? First, you waste your education on nursing, and now you can't even commit to that." "Dad, I'm not abandoning anyone. This research could help people like Mom. I thought you'd be supportive." "Supportive of what?" "Your selfish ambitions. While Ethan is breaking revenue records at his firm, you're chasing pipe dreams at the expense of your family duties." The argument escalated until I left the dining room in tears. Later that night, my mother wheeled herself to my room. "He doesn't mean it," she said, taking my hand. "He's afraid of losing control, of losing me." "That doesn't excuse how he treats me," I replied. My mother's eyes were sad. "No, it doesn't, but Meredith, remember something. Your father and I always promised that whatever happens, you and Ethan would be treated equally. You are both our children, both Montgomery." Those words would come back to haunt me after the accident, the last promise my mother would never keep. The law offices of Parker, Whitman, and Associates occupied the top floor of a glass building in downtown Boston. I arrived 15 minutes early for the will reading, my black dress feeling too tight around the collar. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, directed me to a conference room where Mr. Parker waited. Lawrence Parker had been our family lawyer for over 30 years. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him a distinguished appearance that matched the firm's rich mahogany conference table and leather chairs. Family photos of my parents with Mr. Parker at charity galas lined one wall, a visual timeline of their long relationship. "Meredith," he greeted me with a gentle handshake. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Just water, thank you," I replied, noticing the thick folder labeled Montgomery Estate sitting before him. The door opened again, and Ethan walked in. While I had chosen a simple black dress for the occasion, my brother wore what appeared to be a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His expression was one of practiced sympathy, but I noticed a confidence in his posture that seemed out of place for the somber occasion. "Meredith," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek, "how are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I replied stiffly. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral, where he had handled most arrangements with efficient delegation while I stood in a fog of grief. Mr. Parker cleared his throat as Ethan took a seat opposite me. "Now that you're both here, we can proceed with the reading of Harold and Lillian Montgomery's last will and testament. I know this is a difficult time for both of you, so I'll try to make this as straightforward as possible." He opened the folder and began reading the formal legal language. I found myself staring at a family photo on the wall, my parents' 40th anniversary celebration. I was standing slightly apart from Ethan and my father, who had their arms around each other. My mother sat in her wheelchair between us, her smile strained but present. I was pulled back to attention when Mr. Parker's voice changed tone. "Regarding the distribution of assets," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine, Harold and Lillian Montgomery have designated that the family residence at 247 Hawthorne Street, along with all its contents excluding items specifically mentioned, shall pass to their son, Ethan Montgomery. I blinked, sure I had misheard. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Parker continued without acknowledging my confusion. Additionally, all investment accounts, business holdings, and financial assets shall transfer to Ethan Montgomery to continue the Montgomery legacy of business acumen and financial stewardship. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the armrests of my chair. There must be some mistake. My mother always said we would be treated equally. Mr. Parker finally looked at me, discomfort evident in his expression. To their daughter, Meredith Montgomery, Harold and Lillian leave Lillian's collection of personal jewelry, including but not limited to her costume pieces and the pearl necklace gifted on her 30th birthday. Costume jewelry. My mother's fake pearls and vintage brooches from flea markets. That was my inheritance after 5 years of caregiving, after rearranging my entire life to be there for. Is that all? I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I'm afraid so, Meredith. The will is quite clear. Mr. Parker slid a document toward me. This acknowledges your receipt of the jewelry collection, which has already been set aside in your name. Ethan leaned forward, his expression a practiced mask of concern. Meredith, I know this must come as a shock, but I want you to know I'm here for you. If you need anything, financial assistance, help finding a new place. A new place, I interrupted. What do you mean? Ethan exchanged a glance with Mr. Parker. Well, as the house now belongs to me, I'll be moving in next month after some renovations. I assumed you would be making other arrangements. The reality crashed down on me. Not only had I been disinherited, but I was also being evicted from the home where I had lived while caring for our dying mother. This can't be right, I said, looking to Mr. Parker. My mother promised me, she said we would be treated equally. Mr. Parker shifted uncomfortably. The will was updated last year, Meredith. Both your parents signed it with full mental capacity. I'm sorry, but this is legally binding. I stood up, gathering my purse with shaking hands. I need to go, I can't, I need some air. Ethan followed me into the hallway. Meredith, wait. I know this is a lot to process. I whirled around. A lot to process. You just inherited everything while I got costume jewelry. After everything I did for them, for Mom, while you were too busy building your precious career to even visit regularly. Ethan's sympathetic mask slipped, revealing a flash of something harder underneath. Dad changed the will because he was disappointed in your choices, Meredith. He wanted the Montgomery legacy protected by someone who understood its value. Its value. I was there every day. I held her hand when she couldn't sleep from the pain. I learned how to administer her treatments when the nurses couldn't come. Where were you? Building something that would make Dad proud, Ethan replied, his voice cooler now. Dad always said you chose the path of least resistance. Nursing was easier than business school. Living at home was easier than making your own way. He respected people who challenged themselves. His words felt like a physical blow. I pushed past him toward the elevator, tears blurring my vision. The jewelry is in storage, he called after me. I'll have it delivered to your apartment. And Meredith, you have 30 days to move your things from the house. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and finally let the tears come. The inheritance wasn't just about money or possessions, it was the final statement from my parents about my worth in their eyes. All the sacrifices, all the care I had provided, amounted to a box of costume jewelry and a 30-day eviction notice. As I drove home to a house that was no longer mine, I couldn't shake my mother's words from my mind. You and Ethan would be treated equally. Another promise broken, another Montgomery family lie. My apartment hunt was depressingly quick. With Boston's rental market and my nurse's salary, my options were limited to a one-bedroom unit in a converted triple-decker in Jamaica Plain. It was a far cry from the Brookline mansion, but it was mine or would be, once I signed the lease tomorrow. I sat cross-legged on my childhood bed, surrounded by half-packed boxes when my phone rang. It was Sarah Reynolds, my best friend since nursing school. I still can't believe it, she said when I'd finished recounting the will reading. After everything you did for your mom, it doesn't make sense. Apparently my father thought I took the easy route in life, I replied bitterly. Unlike golden boy Ethan. That's ridiculous. There's nothing easy about nursing, especially while caring for a parent with MS. Sarah paused. Something doesn't add up, Meredith. Your mother would never have agreed to cut you out like this. I sighed, glancing at the cardboard box beside me, the promised jewelry collection that had been delivered by courier that morning. Maybe she didn't have a choice. My father always made the financial decision. Still, Sarah persisted. You said they updated the will last year. Wasn't that when your mom's condition was deteriorating rapidly? And wasn't your dad having memory issues too? I hadn't mentioned my father's memory problems to many people. He had been experiencing occasional confusion and forgetfulness, though he fiercely denied it whenever I suggested he see a doctor. He would never admit it, but yes, I confirm, there were days he couldn't remember what he had for breakfast, then others where he was sharp as ever. Meredith, Sarah said slowly, have you looked through your mother's jewelry yet? Really looked? I hadn't. The box sat untouched, a painful reminder of my parents' final assessment of my worth. With reluctance, I pulled it onto my lap and opened it. Inside lay velvet pouches and small boxes containing my mother's modest collection, the costume pieces my father had always dismissed as playing dress-up. As I sorted through them, memories surfaced. The amber pendant she wore to my nursing school graduation. The silver-plated bracelet she put on for Sunday dinners. At the bottom of the box, I found a small leather jewelry roll I didn't recognize. Unfolding it carefully, I discovered a compartment containing several folded papers. Sarah, I said, my voice suddenly tense, there are letters here. What do they say? Sarah asked. The first was a birthday card I had given my mother 3 years ago, with a handwritten note thanking her for supporting my nursing career. The second was a newspaper clipping of me receiving a hospital commendation for patient care. The third paper made my breath catch, a handwritten note in my mother's increasingly shaky script, dated just 4 months before her death. My dearest Meredith, if you're reading this, things have not gone as I intended. Your father is not himself anymore, though he refuses to acknowledge it. Ethan has been spending more time with him lately, and I fear his influence. I want you to know that you deserve your fair share of everything we built. Our lawyer has the original will in the family Bible. Look in the study. Love, Mom. My hands trembled. Sarah, I need to make some calls. I'll call you back. My first call was to my Aunt Alina, my mother's sister who lived in Providence. Though they hadn't been especially close, Alina had visited several times during my mother's illness. Aunt Alina, it's Meredith. I need to ask you something about Mom and Dad. Alina's voice was cautious. I heard about the will, Meredith. I'm so sorry. Did Mom ever say anything to you? About Dad's health, or about Ethan's visits? A long pause followed. Your mother was very private about family matters, but, another pause, she did mention being concerned about your father's cognitive state. She said he was having good days and bad days, and that on the bad days, Ethan seemed to always be present. What do you mean? Lillian felt that Ethan was scheduling his rare visits to coincide with your father's confusion. She thought it was strange that after hardly visiting for years, he suddenly started coming by when you were on shift at the hospital. Alina's voice lowered. She also mentioned that your father had started taking medication for early-stage dementia, though he insisted no one know about it. I felt a cold certainty settling in my stomach. Did she say anything about their will? Only that she and Harold had always planned to divide everything equally between you two children. She was quite adamant about that. Alina hesitated. Meredith, your father was disappointed by your career choice, but your mother was fiercely proud of you. She would never have agreed to disinherit you. After thanking my aunt, I made another call to my father's former executive assistant, Barbara, who had retired the previous year after 20 years with him. Barbara, it's Meredith Montgomery. Oh, Meredith, I'm so sorry about your parents, such a tragedy. Thank you. I'm calling because I need some information about my father's schedule last year. Specifically, any meetings he might have had with Mr. Parker, our family lawyer." Barbara's voice turned cautious. "I'm not sure I should discuss your father's appointments." "Please, Barbara, it's important. I think something happened with their will, and I'm trying to understand it." A long silence followed. "There was a meeting in March last year. Mr. Parker came to the house, which was unusual, as your father typically went to his office. Ethan was there too." "Was my mother present?" "No," Barbara said slowly. "I remember because I called to confirm some details, and Ethan answered your father's phone. He said your mother was resting and you were at work." She paused. "Meredith, your father wasn't himself that day. When I arrived that morning to organize his papers, he called me by your mother's name twice." My suspicions were crystallizing into something more concrete. Was there anything else unusual about that day? Barbara hesitated. "Your brother asked me to leave early. Said he would handle everything else. It was strange because your father usually insisted I stay until 5, regardless of his schedule." After thanking Barbara, I sat on my bed, mind racing. My father, experiencing cognitive decline and on new medication, meeting with the family lawyer while my mother was resting and I was at work. Ethan, suddenly present after years of minimal involvement, answering my father's phone and dismissing staff. The final piece fell into place when I remembered my mother's note. The family Bible in the study. I needed to get back to the house, my former home, before Ethan emptied it. As I formulated my plan, another thought struck me. If my father had been experiencing cognitive decline significant enough to confuse names and require medication, could he have been legally competent to change his will? And if not, had Ethan knowingly taken advantage of our father's condition to secure the entire inheritance for himself? The ethical implications were staggering. I had spent my career as a nurse advocating for patients' autonomy and protection. Now I faced a painful dilemma. Respect what might have been my father's final wishes, however influenced by cognitive decline and manipulation, or fight for what my mother had indicated was their true intent and what basic fairness suggested was right. I reached for my phone again, this time searching for lawyers who specialized in contested wills. Whatever my decision, I needed to understand my options. 3 days after discovering my mother's note, I found myself sitting in the office of Diane Reynolds, a will contest specialist recommended by a colleague at the hospital. Her office was notably different from Parker's ornate chambers, practical, modern, with credentials rather than society photos adorning the walls. "Based on what you've told me," Diane said, reviewing my notes, "you have potential grounds to contest the will on the basis of undue influence and questionable mental capacity." She looked up at me over reading glasses. "But I should warn you, these cases can get ugly. Family secrets tend to spill out in public record." "I understand," I replied. "But I can't just let this go. It's not even about the money, it's about the fact that my brother apparently manipulated our dying father to cut me out completely." "What evidence do we have of your father's cognitive state?" Diane asked. I opened my bag and produced a folder. I requested his medical records from the last 2 years. As his healthcare proxy after my mother became unable to serve, I had legal access. I pushed the folder across the desk. He was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 18 months ago and prescribed Donepezil. There are notes from his neurologist expressing concern about his decision-making capacity, especially on days when he missed medication. Dan skimmed the records, her expression growing more confident. "This helps significantly. Do you know which days he met with Mr. Parker to change the will?" "March 15th of last year, according to my father's former assistant." Dan flipped through the records. "Interesting. There's a note here from a home health nurse dated March 14th, stating your father was experiencing increased confusion and had missed 2 doses of medication due to what he called stomach upset." She looked up. "The timing is suspicious, to say the least." Armed with legal advice and the medical records, I decided to confront Ethan directly before filing any formal contest. Maybe, faced with evidence, he would agree to honor our parents' original intentions. I found him at his office in a sleek downtown high-rise, where he'd recently been promoted to chief marketing officer. His assistant, clearly unaccustomed to unannounced visitors, tried to turn me away. "I'm sorry, Mr. Montgomery is in meetings all afternoon." "Tell him his sister is here regarding the Montgomery estate," I interrupted. "He'll see me." 5 minutes later, I was ushered into Ethan's corner office with its panoramic views of Boston Harbor. He stood behind his desk, his expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Meredith, this is unexpected," he gestured to a chair. "I thought we covered everything at the reading." I remained standing. "We need to talk about Dad's mental state when he changed the will." Ethan's face hardened almost imperceptibly. "What are you implying?" I placed the medical records on his desk. Dad was diagnosed with dementia. He was on medication that affected his cognitive function. The day before he changed the will, he missed 2 doses and was experiencing confusion. You were there when Mr. Parker came to the house when Mom was resting and I was at work. You're spinning conspiracy theories now. Dad was perfectly lucid when he made his decisions. Ethan's voice remained controlled, but a vein pulsed in his temple. Was he? Because his home health nurse documented otherwise. I leaned forward. "I also found Mom's note, Ethan. She hid it in her jewelry, the only thing you let me have. She knew something was wrong. She mentioned the original will in the family Bible." At this, Ethan's composure cracked. "You always were her favorite," he snapped, color rising in his face. "Always the dutiful daughter, the selfless nurse. Do you have any idea what it was like competing with St. Meredith? Dad built an empire, and all he wanted was for his children to carry it forward. I did everything he asked: Harvard, business career, connections with the right people. What did you do? You chose a profession that barely keeps you in a decent apartment." "I chose to help people," I countered. "Including our mother, while you were too busy climbing the corporate ladder to visit more than twice a month. I was building something lasting. You were changing bedpans and reading her romance novels. Dad recognized which of us had the vision to protect the Montgomery legacy." "Did he? Or did you catch him on a bad day and convince him to change his will?" I pulled out another document. "This is a letter from his neurologist describing how suggestible patients with his condition can be, especially to trusted family members." "I'm contesting the will, Ethan. I have the medical records, witness statements about his condition, and Mom's note." Ethan's face transformed into something I barely recognized: cold, calculating, angry. "Go ahead, contest it. I'll hire the best estate lawyers in Massachusetts. I'll make sure everyone knows you're just a greedy nurse trying to grab money you didn't earn. I'll tell all their friends how you abandoned them to pursue your research opportunity in the final months." "That's not what happened." "It's what they'll believe happened. The dutiful son protecting his father's final wishes against the money-hungry daughter who couldn't respect her father's decisions." He straightened his tie. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Unlike the glorified babysitting you call a career." I left Ethan's office shaking with rage and hurt, but more determined than ever. Within days, the battle lines were drawn. I formally contested the will with Diane Reynolds representing me. Ethan, true to his word, hired Blackwell and Associates, one of Boston's most expensive estate litigation. The social fallout was immediate and painful. Ethan had already been cultivating a narrative among our parents' friends, portraying himself as the dutiful son honoring his father's legacy while painting me as absent and career-obsessed. When news of my contest spread, many family friends took sides. Some, who had witnessed my daily care of my mother, stood by me. Others, particularly my father's business associates, closed ranks around Ethan. The most painful blow came when I went to retrieve personal items from my childhood home before Ethan's planned renovations. I arrived to find the locks changed and a security guard at the door. "I'm sorry, Miss Montgomery," the guard said, handing me a letter. "I have instructions to give you this but not to permit entry without Mr. Montgomery's presence." The letter, on Blackwell and Associates letterhead, informed me that due to concerns about estate property removal prior to legal resolution, I would only be allowed to collect personal items under supervision at specifically scheduled time. My childhood home, where I had lived while caring for my mother through her final years, was now a fortress I couldn't enter freely. The family photos, my mother's books that we had read together during her illness, even my own childhood mementos were now behind locked doors, controlled by my brother. The emotional strain began affecting my work. One afternoon, while checking on an elderly female patient with Miss too similar to my mother, I found myself fighting tears as I adjusted her medication. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, her kindly face reminding me painfully of my mother's. "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Just, you remind me of someone." "Someone important, I think," she replied gently. I nodded, unable to speak, and fled to the staff bathroom where I finally broke down. That's where Dr. Michael Barrett found me 10 minutes later, red-eyed and exhausted. "Meredith," he called through the door. "The charge nurse said you might need someone to talk to." Michael was a neurologist I'd worked with on several cases, kind, thoughtful, and known for his patient advocacy. He had always treated the nursing staff with unusual respect. "I'm okay," I called back unconvincingly. "No, you're not," he replied simply. "And that's perfectly understandable. When you're ready, I'll be in the doctor's lounge. I have terrible coffee and a good listening ear." And later, we sat in the mostly empty lounge as I explained the situation. Michael listened without interruption, his brow furrowing deeper as I described my father's cognitive state and Ethan's convenient timing. "The neurologist's notes you mentioned," he said when I finished. "Who was treating your father?" "Dr. Abrams at Mass General." Michael's eyes widened slightly. "Lawrence Abrams, he was my mentor during residency. If he documented concerns about your father's capacity, that's significant evidence. The problem is proving that Ethan knowingly took advantage of Dad's condition," I explain. "He'll just say Dad had a clear moment that day." Michael considered this. "Medical records can sometimes show patterns that a layperson wouldn't recognize. With your permission, I'd be happy to review your father's complete records. As a neurologist, I might spot something that could strengthen your case." His offer of help, the first concrete support I'd received since this nightmare began, brought tears to my eyes again. "I would appreciate that," I said softly. "More than I can say. And Meredith," he added, "I might have another connection that could help. My cousin is a former prosecutor who now specializes in elder law and financial exploitation cases. She might be willing to consult on this." For the first time since the will reading, I felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps with the right help and evidence, justice might still be possible. But as I would soon discover, the situation was about to get both worse and better in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of legal motions, counter-motions, and mounting bills. Diane Reynolds warned me that estate litigation was expensive, but the reality still shocked me. Even with taking extra shifts at the hospital, I was draining my savings at an alarming rate. "We have a preliminary hearing next Tuesday," Diane informed me during our weekly update call. "Blackwell is pushing for dismissal, arguing that you have no standing since the will clearly excludes you." "Can they do that?" I asked, pacing the small confines of my new apartment. I had moved in 2 weeks earlier, my life condensed into boxes that I still hadn't found the energy to fully unpack. "They can try. But Judge Hernandez is generally fair-minded when it comes to will contests, especially with the evidence we've gathered about your father's cognitive state." That evidence had grown stronger thanks to Dr. Barrett's analysis of my father's medical records. He had identified a clear pattern of cognitive fluctuation correlating with medication timing, and particularly noted the documented confusion in the days surrounding the will change. "What about Ethan's claim that I'm just after the money?" I asked. "That's the story he's telling everyone." "We're gathering testimony from your mother's caregivers about your involvement and commitment," Diane assured me. "That should help counter that narrative." What Diane couldn't help with was the toll the battle was taking on every aspect of my life. My small apartment, while functional, felt temporary and impersonal compared to the family home. The financial strain of legal fees meant I was picking up night shifts and weekend coverage, leaving me perpetually exhausted. The worst moment came when I received a formal letter from the hospital administration regarding my performance. Recent concerns have been raised about your focus and attention to detail, it stated clinically. While we understand you are going through personal challenges, patient care must remain our priority. I knew who had raised those concerns, a new doctor who happened to be a family friend of Ethan's. The warning wasn't justified by any actual mistakes, but it was enough to put my position under scrutiny at a time when I desperately needed the income. When Dr. Barrett found me staring at the letter in the staff lounge, he immediately recognized something was wrong. "Meredith, what happened?" I handed him the letter wordlessly. His face darkened as he read it. "This is ridiculous. Your work has been exemplary despite everything you're dealing with." He looked up. "Dr. Kellerman is behind this, isn't he? I saw him having lunch with your brother last week." "You did." This was the first I'd heard of such a connection. "They seem quite friendly." "I thought it was strange since you mentioned your brother rarely visited your mother during her treatments here." Michael's expression grew concerned. "Is it possible he's trying to undermine your position at the hospital?" The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made a terrible kind of sense. Without my job, I wouldn't be able to afford to continue the legal battle. Was Ethan really willing to go that far? "I can speak to the chief of medicine," Michael offered. "Your performance reviews from nursing leadership have been consistently excellent. This letter doesn't align with your actual record." His support meant more than he could know. Over the past weeks, Michael had become my most steadfast ally, reviewing documents, connecting me with his cousin for legal advice, and simply being there when the weight of it all became too much. "Thank you," I said sincerely, "but I need to handle this myself. If Ethan is behind it, responding dramatically will only play into his hands." I addressed the letter by requesting a formal performance review with nursing leadership, who quickly confirmed there were no substantiated concerns about my work. The warning was quietly removed from my file, but the incident left me shaken. Ethan's reach was longer than I had realized, and his willingness to hurt me more profound. The preliminary hearing arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Judge Hernandez, a stern-faced woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, listened as Blackwell's senior partner argued that the case should be dismissed. "Your Honor, the will's language is clear and unambiguous. Harold Montgomery made his wishes known in a legally executed document. Miss Montgomery's claims of undue influence are speculative at best and self-serving at worst." Dan countered with the medical evidence. "Your Honor, we have substantial documentation that Mr. Montgomery was experiencing cognitive impairment during the period when this will was changed. His neurologist expressed specific concerns about his decision-making capacity. Furthermore, we have evidence suggesting the will was changed under suspicious circumstances when the testator was experiencing documented confusion and without the knowledge of his wife or daughter, who was serving as his healthcare proxy." Judge Hernandez reviewed the medical records carefully before looking up. "I find sufficient evidence to proceed with a full hearing." Motion to dismiss denied. It was a small victory, but an important one. As we left the courtroom, I caught sight of Ethan in intense conversation with his lawyer, his face flushed with anger. The full hearing was scheduled for 8 weeks later, giving both sides time to gather additional evidence and testimony. The process was grueling: depositions from family friends, medical experts, and caregivers, financial analysts examining the estate, even interviews with my parents' former household staff. Throughout this period, my financial situation grew increasingly precarious. Legal bills mounted despite Diane's efforts to keep costs manageable. I was working maximum shifts at the hospital, often going days without proper rest. My small apartment remained half unpacked, a physical manifestation of my life in limbo. One evening, after a particularly exhausting 12-shift, I returned home to find an eviction notice on my door. My landlord, citing late rent payments which I had indeed struggled to make on time as legal fees consumed my budget, was giving me 30 days to vacate. Sitting on my still-boxed belongings, I finally broke down. I had lost my parents, my childhood home, my financial security, and now even this modest apartment. The injustice of it all crashed over me in waves. For the first time, I seriously considered dropping the case, letting Ethan have his ill-gotten inheritance if it meant I could simply rebuild some semblance of stability. I was still sitting there, contemplating defeat, when my phone rang. It was Michael. "Meredith, I need you to come to the hospital right away." "Michael, I just finished a 12 shift, I can't." "It's about your case. I found something important. Something in the hospital records from your mother's last admission." Exhaustion forgotten, I grabbed my keys and headed back to the hospital. Michael met me in his office, where he had several files spread across his desk. "Your mother was admitted 3 times in her final year," he explained. "During her last stay, 6 months before the accident, she had a private conversation with her attending physician, Dr. Winters, that was documented in her restricted notes." He handed me a printout. As a treating physician, I requested access to review her neurological status. This was in the file. The note read, "Patient expressed concern about husband's cognitive decline and possible manipulation by son. Requested referral to elder law attorney but asked that this be kept confidential. Referral provided to Patricia Winters, JD." My hands trembled. My mother was seeking legal help. She never mentioned this. "The attorney she was referred to is my cousin," Michael said. "I called her immediately. She confirmed meeting with your mother but couldn't share details due to attorney-client privilege even though your mother has passed." "Then how does this help us?" "Because," Michael explained, "while Patricia can't breach confidentiality, she told me your mother left something with her. Something for safekeeping." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a Bible, the Montgomery family Bible. "How did you get this?" I whispered. "Patricia said your mother brought it to her office last year, asking her to keep it safe. She said if anything happened to her, it should go to you. When I told Patricia about the note you found mentioning the Bible, she agreed it was time to pass it along." With shaking hands, I opened the worn leather cover. Inside the front cover, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "The truth shall set you free," and tucked between the pages of Proverbs was a sealed envelope labeled, "Original Will of Harold and Lillian Montgomery, executed January 15, 2020. The will inside, properly signed and witnessed, divided the Montgomery estate equally between Ethan and me. But even more damning was what we found when we continued searching through the Bible, a small journal my mother had kept during the last year of her life, documenting my father's cognitive decline in detail. She noted days when he couldn't remember what year it was, moments when he confused Ethan with his own brother who had died decades earlier, and most significantly, an entry from March 15. "Harold, very confused today, called me by his mother's name repeatedly. Ethan arrived with Mr. Parker. When I asked why they were meeting, Ethan said it was about business matters and insisted I rest. I'm worried about what's happening. Harold is not himself today." The journal provided the evidence we needed: contemporaneous documentation of my father's state on the exact day the will was changed, written by my mother, who had no reason to fabricate such detail. As I held these precious documents, tears of vindication and grief mingled. My mother had tried to protect me even as her own health failed. She had created a safety net I never knew existed until now. "This changes everything," I whispered. Michael nodded. "It does, and Meredith, about your housing situation. I have a guest apartment above my garage. It's yours for as long as you need it, no rent required." I looked up, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Michael, I couldn't." "You could," he said firmly, "and you should. Friends help each other, especially when the battle isn't fair." For the first time in months, I felt something beyond grief and anger: hope, yes, but also a warm spark of connection to this man who had become so much more than a colleague. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected for the final hearing. Word had spread through my parents' social circle about the contested will, and both sides had their supporters. I sat beside Diane, trying to project confidence despite my churning stomach. Across the aisle, Ethan looked immaculate as always in a tailored suit, whispering with his legal team. Judge Hernandez entered, and proceedings began with opening statement. Blackwell's attorney emphasized the legal execution of the will, my father's business acumen, and his right to distribute his estate as he saw fit. Diane countered with a clear timeline of my father's cognitive decline and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the will change. The testimony phase began with medical experts. Dr. Abrams, my father's neurologist, confirmed that his condition would have made him particularly vulnerable to suggestion, especially when experiencing confusion. Ethan's team brought in their own expert who argued that dementia patients often have periods of complete lucidity where they can make sound decisions. When my mother's caregivers testified about my daily involvement in her care versus Ethan's rare visits, I saw several jurors exchange meaningful glances. The narrative Ethan had constructed of the devoted son versus the absent daughter was beginning to crumble. The most difficult moment came when Ethan took the stand. Under questioning from his attorney, he painted a picture of a son carrying on his father's legacy while respecting his final wishes. My father built an empire from nothing, he testified smoothly. His greatest concern was that his life's work would continue to grow rather than be dismantled. He chose me as the steward of that legacy because I demonstrated the same business acumen and commitment. During cross-examination, Diane was methodical. Mr. Montgomery, how often did you visit your mother during her illness? As often as my schedule allowed, Ethan replied. My father understood that building our business required my full attention. And would you say that was weekly? Monthly, Ethan shifted. It varied. My sister was there daily, so there wasn't the same need for me to be physically present. I contributed in other ways, such as financial support, strategic planning for their estate, maintaining the business relationships that sustained our family's position. Diane nodded. Yet when it came time to change the will that had previously divided the estate equally, you were suddenly present. In fact, you were there on March 15 last year when Mr. Parker came to the house, correct? Yes, to support my father. On a day when, according to multiple medical records and your mother's own journal, he was experiencing significant confusion, calling your mother by his own mother's name. Unable to recall what year it was, Diane approached with the journal. Were you aware of his state that day? Ethan's confidence wavered slightly. Everyone has off days. He knew what he was doing with the will. Did he? Or did you see an opportunity when your father was vulnerable? Diane pressed. Did you suggest changes that would benefit you exclusively, knowing he was experiencing cognitive impairment? Objection. Calls for speculation, Blackwell interjected. Sustain, Judge Hernandez ruled, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the air. As testimony continued, I noticed a man slip into the back of the courtroom. Jason Thompson, Ethan's college roommate and longtime friend. We had met several times at family events over the years, though we were never close. What surprised me was the folder he carried and the determined set of his jaw as he approached Diane during a recess, whispering urgently. When court resumed, Diane requested permission to call an additional witness. Despite Blackwell's objections, Judge Hernandez allowed it. Jason Thompson took the stand, visibly nervous but resolute. After establishing his long friendship with Ethan, Diane asked the key question. Mr. Thompson, why did you come forward today? Jason glanced at Ethan, whose face had gone rigid. Because what's happening isn't right. Ethan called me the night before the will was changed. He was excited. He said he had finally figured out how to secure the Montgomery legacy for himself. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Did he elaborate on what he meant? Diane asked. He said his father was having one of his confused days the next morning, and that it was perfect timing for the lawyer visit he had arranged. Jason swallowed hard. He told me his father would sign anything put in front of him in that state, especially if Ethan told him it was for the good of the company. Objection. Hearsay, Blackwell thundered. Your Honor, this goes directly to the question of undue influence and the witness's first-hand knowledge of the defendant's state of mind, Diane countered. Judge Hernandez considered briefly. I'll allow it. Continue. Mr. Thompson, do you have any documentation of this conversation? Diane asked. Jason opened the folder he had brought. Ethan texted me the next day, after the will was signed. He handed over a printout of text messages. He wrote, "It's done. Dad signed everything over to me. Meredith gets nothing but Mom's costume jewelry." Poetic justice for choosing nursing over the family business. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I stared at Ethan, who was now ashen-faced, whispering frantically to his attorney. "No further questions, Your Honor," Diane said, returning to her seat with a quietly confident expression. Blackwell's cross-examination was aggressive, suggesting Jason had personal motives for betraying his friend, but the damage was done. The text messages spoke for themselves. Judge Hernandez called a recess to review all evidence before making her ruling. As we waited in a small conference room, Diane was cautiously optimistic. The journal, the medical records, and now these text messages, that's compelling evidence of undue influence during a period of diminished capacity, she said. "I think we have a strong case." When court resumed, Judge Hernandez delivered her ruling with clear disapproval in her voice. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds clear and convincing evidence that Harold Montgomery lacked the capacity to fully understand the implications of the will changes made on March 15 of last year. Furthermore, the evidence strongly suggests these changes were made under undue influence during a period of cognitive vulnerability. She looked directly at Ethan. This court cannot condone the exploitation of elderly individuals suffering from cognitive impairment, particularly when that exploitation comes from those they trust most. The will dated March 15 is hereby invalidated. Relief flooded through me as she continued. The previous will, dated January 15, 2020, which divides the Montgomery estate equally between Ethan and Meredith Montgomery, shall be recognized as the valid expression of Harold and Lillian Montgomery's wishes. Outside the courtroom, reporters from local papers had gathered, drawn by the prominence of the Montgomery name and the dramatic nature of the case. As Diane fielded their questions with diplomatic responses, I spotted Ethan standing alone by the elevator, his legal team already departed. Something compelled me to approach him. For all his manipulation and cruelty, he was still my brother, the boy who had taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me from bullies in elementary school before the competition between us soured into resentment. "Ethan," I said quietly. He turned, his expression a complex mixture of anger, defeat, and something else, perhaps shame. "Come to gloat? No, to understand." "Why, Ethan, we're family. Mom and Dad always intended for us to share everything." His composure cracked. "Because you were always their favorite. Even when you defied Dad by choosing nursing, even when you argued with him about his business practices, somehow you were still special. The daughter who followed her heart. The noble caregiver." His voice broke. "Do you know what it's like to do everything right, Harvard, business success, social connections, and still feel like you're falling short? Falling short. Dad practically worshipped you. He respected my business acumen because it mirrored his own. Mom." Ethan looked away. "Mom loved you differently. When she was sick, she lit up when you entered the room. With me, it was always polite appreciation for the gifts, for the financial support. But with you, it was love pure and unconditional. I hadn't expected this vulnerability, this glimpse into my brother's insecurities." "Ethan, that's not true. Mom loved us both. Maybe, but I could never give her what you could. Presence, care, genuine connection." He straightened his tie, trying to regain composure. "When Dad started getting confused, I saw an opportunity to finally win, to get the validation through his legacy that I couldn't get in other ways. It was wrong. That now." His admission stunned me. "What happens now, Ethan?" "I don't know. My reputation in the business community." He trailed off. "The text messages, the court case, it will all come out." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion for my brother, a deeply flawed person who had made terrible choices from a place of pain and insecurity. "Maybe we can find a way forward," I said cautiously. "Not as business partners or best friends, but as family. With boundaries." Ethan looked skeptical. "Why would you even want that after what I did?" "Because life is short. Mom and Dad are gone. We're all that's left of the Montgomerys now." I took a deep breath. "I'm not saying I forgive you yet, or that I trust you. But maybe, with time, we can build something new. Something healthier." For the first time in years, Ethan's expression wasn't calculated or competitive, just raw and uncertain. I wouldn't know where to start. Neither would I admitted, but maybe that's the point. As we stood there in the courthouse hallway, nothing was resolved between us. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too severe for easy reconciliation. But a door had opened, a small possibility that someday we might find our way back to being family in some form. The real victory wasn't just the legal win or the vindication of my parents' true wishes. It was the beginning of reclaiming my self-worth from the narrative that had diminished me, the realization that my choices had value, that caring for others was not the path of least resistance, but one requiring profound strength and compassion. 6 months after the court's decision, I stood in the foyer of my childhood home, surrounded by moving boxes and bubble-wrap picture frames. The grand staircase that had intimidated me as a child now seemed smaller somehow, more human-scaled as sunlight streamed through the windows. After much deliberation, Ethan and I had agreed to sell the house. Neither of us wanted to live with the complicated memories it held, and dividing its contents had proven less contentious than I'd feared. Ethan took my father's business memorabilia and the formal furniture he'd always admired. I chose my mother's books, her piano, and the kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals during her illness. "The realtor thinks we'll have an offer by next week," Ethan said, entering with a clipboard of inventory lists. Our interactions remained cautious, businesslike, but without the open hostility that had characterized our court battle. "Good," I replied. "I'm just finishing in the library." The library had been my mother's favorite room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable reading chairs. As I wrapped the last of her beloved classic novels, I found a small leather-bound volume I'd never seen before, tucked behind the collected works of Jane Austen. It was a personal journal, different from the one that had been crucial evidence in court. Opening it carefully, I recognized my mother's handwriting. The entries were sporadic, mostly from the year before her death. One caught my eye. "Meredith came today with daffodils, my favorite. She read to me from Pride and Prejudice even after her 12-hour shift. Harold doesn't understand her choice of nursing, but I do. She has a healer's heart, strong enough to witness suffering without looking away. I hope someday she knows how proud I'm of the woman she's become." Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal and added it to my box of keepsakes. These words, this validation of my choices and my care, meant more than any inheritance. The proceeds from the house sale were substantial. True to the ruling, they were divided equally between Ethan and me. By share provided financial security I'd never known as a nurse, but more importantly, it offered choices. After careful consideration, I established the Lillian Montgomery Nursing Scholarship at Boston University, specifically for students interested in neurological care and MS research. The endowment would ensure that future nurses could follow their passion without the financial strain I had experienced. My personal life had transformed as well. Michael Barrett's temporary housing offer had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. What began as friendship during my legal battle deepened as we discovered shared values, complementary personalities, and an easy comfort in each other's company. 6 months of dinners, conversations, and quiet evenings had blossomed into love, unexpected but welcome. "Have you decided about the research position?" Michael asked one evening as we prepared dinner in his kitchen. The innovative mistreatment study I had once hoped to join had reopened applications, and the lead researcher had personally invited me to apply. "I'm submitting my application tomorrow," I confirmed. With the scholarship foundation established, I finally feel ready to focus on my career again, Michael smiled. "They'd be lucky to have you. Your experience with your mother gives you insights other researchers might miss." His support meant everything, the simple belief that my nursing career had value, that my perspective mattered. It was a stark contrast to my father's dismissal and Ethan's condescension. Speaking of Ethan, our relationship remained a work in progress. We weren't close, probably never would be, but we had established a tentative peace. Monthly dinners, always in public restaurants to maintain neutral ground, allowed us to slowly rebuild some form of sibling relationship. At our most recent dinner, Ethan had surprised me with an unexpected announcement. "I'm seeing a therapist," he'd said, studying his wine glass intently. "Working through some issues about Dad, about competition, about measuring success." "That's good, Ethan," I'd replied, genuinely pleased. "I've been seeing someone too. Grief counseling, mostly. It's helped." The grief counseling had been Michael's suggestion, a way to process not just my parents' deaths but the complex emotions surrounding the inheritance battle and its resolution. Through those sessions, I'd come to understand that my father's disappointment had never truly been about me, it had been about his own narrow definition of success and worth. One crisp autumn afternoon, I visited my parents' grave with a bouquet of my mother's favorite daffodils. Michael had offered to accompany me, but this visit felt necessary to make alone. As I placed the flowers between their headstones, I spoke aloud the words I needed them both to hear. "I forgive you, Dad, for not seeing the value in my choices. And Mom, I understand why you couldn't stand against him more firmly. You both did your best with the tools you had." I took a deep breath. "I'm building a different life now, one that honors nursing as a calling and compassion as strength. I'm finding joy again, finding love. I hope you can see that somehow." The wind rustled through nearby trees, tearing the first fallen leaves of the season across the cemetery grounds. In that peaceful moment, I felt something settle within me, not an end to grief, but a transformation of it into something that could coexist with happiness and purpose. The legal battle had ultimately given me something more valuable than money or property. It had forced me to stand up for my worth, to refuse the narrative that had diminished my choices and contributions. In fighting for my inheritance, I had reclaimed something far more fundamental: my sense of self. As I drove home to Michael's house that was gradually becoming our house, I reflected on how our true inheritance isn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds. It's found in how we carry our parents' love forward, how we learn from their mistakes, and how we build lives that honor both their gifts and our own authentic paths. Family may be our greatest wound, but it can also be our strongest foundation, not in its perfection, but in how we heal its fractures and rebuild with stronger materials. Honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to write new stories when the old ones no longer serve us. If you've ever faced family conflict or felt your choices weren't valued, I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't determined by others' limited perceptions. Have you experienced similar family struggles or inheritance conflicts? Share your story in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else feeling alone in their journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe if my story touched you, and thank you for witnessing this chapter of my life. Remember that sometimes our greatest strength comes after our deepest wounds, and the family we choose can heal what the family we're born into may have broken.